Once again, thanks to the store Audio Sanctuary, otherwise known as Unilet, in New Malden, London, for letting me extensively demo the Utopia along with shooting footage for this review in store. As promised in last week's video, here is the entire review of the Focal Utopia. Please do check out the written review, link in the description below if you require even more detailed impressions. As I demonstrated in last week's video, the Utopia unit that is on display in store is nowhere near as creaky as the one that was reviewed by Tal over at Inner Fidelity. I find the build quality to be quite sturdy. It isn't indestructible like some headphones appear to be, but it is far away from being thought of as flimsy. There is a good amount of weight to these headphones, with them weighing about 490 grams, about 40 grams more than my Focal Air. The weight, however, is distributed quite evenly and quite well, with the leather headband doing a great job of this. The AirPads are also made of lambskin leather and differ quite a bit from the Alairs. They are softer to the touch and yet provide more cushioning. I also found that the clamp of the headphone to be quite similar to the Alair, and I can easily wear both for like hours on end. Both are headphones for listening to upright, however, because if you're lying down or if you're leaning too far back, it applies too much pressure on the lower back of your ears, causing some strain and a little fatigue. Although I didn't get a look at the box, I know from other unboxing videos that it just comes with the cable and nothing else. Terminated in a 1/4 inch Nutric connector, I was surprised to see that the length of the cable was shortened by about a meter, I'm guessing, from the cable that I received with my Focal Alair, which was a 4-meter cable, by the way. The sound of the Utopia can be called anti-aliasing for your ears. It's quite a bit brighter than the warm Alair and succeeds in making most of its competition seem veiled by comparison. The impact and dynamics are the strongest I have heard yet from a headphone of any form factor and driver technology, besides electrostatics. And by electrostatics, I mean high-end electrostatics. The soundstage is more intimate than even many other open headphones that I have reviewed in the past. I would say it's quite similar to the Sennheiser 600 series in this regard. The Utopia, however, is able to do more with less space, and I found myself wondering quite often how some instruments, despite sounding closer to my ear than on the Sennheiser HD800, were able to sound so clearly audible. This really brings details out in songs, even songs I've been listening to for my entire life. I noticed new things in. This feeling of the natural emphasis in instrument tracks was very apparent in the kick drum recorded by Lars Ulrich in Metallica's Ride the Lightning album. Buried under layers and layers of heavily distorted and reverb-soaked guitars, I often had heard the presence of the bass drum in the past, but never really quite experienced it in a manner which it felt live or even realistic. It might have very well been a drum machine in many setups. The Utopia managed, however, to dig deep and find a way to present it so it sounded more like it should. The Utopia's manner of doing this actually reminds me in some way of the Sennheiser HE1 Orpheus. While the Utopia doesn't quite have the immediacy of the Sennheiser Electrostat, both manage to add some context to what is being heard. By context, I mean that the audible knowledge that there is a clear beginning and an end to any piece of recorded music. A kick drum strike has a hit and a decay, and too often in audio, it will sound like you are just hearing the loudest milliseconds, the basic requirement of rendering it audible on any piece of audio gear. What the Utopia does is bring forth the moment of impact and the decay after in clarity, giving a strike that merely clicked before suddenly have the whole thud sound. Listening to Ottmar Liebert's binaural acoustic album Up Close on the Utopia, I did immediately feel a lack of distance between the instruments that I am used to with my HD800 at home. The separation of the instruments was stellar, however, and the imaging was quite good, but I really might have to give the edge in this regard to the HD800. I feel that there were some pans that did not move as precisely as I am used to with this album. Adding to the early discussion about kick drums, a track on this album has a section which introduces hand clapping, and these sound far more realistic on the Utopia than on my Alair or my HD800 due to a lingering sensation that follows each one and the dynamic impact of each one's introduction. The bass of the Utopia is punchy and quite fast, extending decently low. It possesses a full sound that I feel is lacking with the Sennheiser AC800 to my ears, and lets it keep up with any genre of music that I throw at it, whether it be orchestral or EDM. That being said, the bass is not bloated nor loud in volume, and this headphone will definitely not satisfy the staunchest basshead, who might look to the Alere instead for that fix if they insist on buying from Focal. As with the AC800, the precise nature of bass guitars on the Utopia is stellar, except that it's even more audible than it is on the Sennheiser by a significant amount. Once again, I turned to Metallica's 1980s albums, which have the reputation of burying the bass in the mix, and I found the bass to be more noticeable than I've heard before, without devolving into a mid-bass or mid-range bleed like the Fostex THX100. It was a Daft Punk song that showed me the strength of the lower mid-range as well, which is not overbearing but very precise once again. The song in question is called Daft Funk, and it consists of a driving beat that continues throughout most of the song with added instrumentation piling on top of it. How the instruments pile on top of one another is an important way for me to decipher the capability of a headphone's reproduction of audio in detail. Some headphones do very well with the bass and drum aspect of the song, such as the THX100, but fail to bring out the detail in the rest of it. Other headphones do an incredible job with the fine detail, but don't have the bass thump to give the song its fullest drive and groove. I find that most headphones are somewhere in between these two examples, but none has balanced the two quite as well as the Utopia. The mid-range itself is quite a departure from a limitation that the Alere has, which is a dip in the upper mids that can make female vocals sound distant. I found that female vocals on the Utopia had a lot more body to them than I'm used to with my AC800 and Alere. The separation of vocal harmonies and layering was also very well done, with each new entry into the mix being effortlessly audible. Guitars, both acoustic and electric, sounded as lifelike as they should. Due to the dynamics of the Utopia, softly played guitars sounded as laid back as they should, while the more aggressively strummed power chords sounded as impactful and dynamic as they should. I would not characterize the mid-range as being especially liquid, however, which is a word I use to describe the HE500's mid-range. But the experience of the Utopia is that you get what you give. A detailed treble extension can do wonders for more intricately recorded music, as my time with the AC800 has taught me, but the Utopia does more without any painful peaks to my ears. It is still a rather bright headphone, but not one that is gutted in the low end at all. I can safely say that the detail that is shown within instruments such as strings, horns, cymbals, snare drums, what have you, shows that the Utopia is fearless in how it approaches anything that it has the tendency to be buried in the mix on lesser headphones, given that the source is high enough bitrate, ideally CD quality. As I mentioned before, the Utopia brings out immense detail in just about any recording, and has a sound that can be best described as awake. Outside of electrostatic headphones, I have not heard music being presented in such a dynamic fashion before, and it does a better job at this than my Focal Alere. Being between the two, I can hear the difference in technology and implementation quite well. My daily driver since September, the Alere has a very dynamic sound, even more so than my HT800 and other headphones that I've owned and reviewed in the past. This is best shown in songs with a piano track, as there is just so much depth to each note and the attack is sudden and impactful. However, the Utopia does what the Alere does in a far better manner, reminding a listener of the price difference. It is frankly incredible how listening to the same song on either can render the Alere as dull and the Utopia as the clear victor in dynamics and impact. A snare hit in a song might sound complete and fulfilling on the Alere, but compared to the immense crash that the Utopia drags out of the same recording, it thuds in comparison. The dynamics of the Alere and the potential to surprise you in songs pales in comparison to the Utopia, which has no chill when it comes to the reproduction of audio. This headphone will not back down from a recording and will always sound like it's giving its absolute all. The Alere is a bassier headphone, however, with a lot more bass thump to its sound, along with a heightened mid-bass presence that extends a bit into the lower mids, making it a clearly warmer headphone than the Utopia. When I listened to an acoustic guitar track that I've recorded myself, I found that the Alere made it sound a lot more earthy and bloomy, but the Utopia made it sound precise and brought out any flaws in my playing, exposing all. Another notable difference is that the Utopia's ability to present clean and undistorted audio at even high volume beats the Alere, which is suitable for more moderate to moderately high listening volumes, becoming a bit too shouty and harsh in its upper region if pushed high. I'm told that some prefer the Utopia with the Illyris pads. I have yet to try this myself, but I will do so in a future visit to Audio Sanctuary because I'm quite curious about that. Basically, the argument is that the Illyris pads inject a more bass thump into the Utopia without taking away too much or any detail or dynamics at all. I would make the argument that these were the most technically proficient dynamic driver headphones on the market before the Utopia showed up. It should be noted that there's a large price difference between the Sennheisers and the Utopia, making the Sennheisers a lot more affordable to the masses, as much as you can expect in this hobby. Switching between the two, the HC800S is the clear winner in soundstage range and imaging. It is the most holophonic headphones I have heard yet, making binaural audio sound lifelike and precise. The Utopia on the range front is far more intimate between the two options, but it manages to utilize the space very well. At no point, even in the most hectic of songs, did I find that there was overlap of instruments and vocals in a manner that sounded congested. The Sennheisers have a wide canvas on which to paint, but the Focal's brushwork is more finely detailed. The Utopia is also not all that picky about source and is easily amped. I plugged it into my Samsung Galaxy S6 and it still shockingly sounded pretty damn good. Out of my portable setup, my own M1S plugged into a VE Runabout Plus, it was driven entirely with only 9 to 10 o'clock on the dial. They both scale enormously well, but the Utopia can sound like itself from a basic setup. Compare this to the notoriously picky HC800, which can sound way too harsh and treble glaring on some amplifiers and sources, leading many to seek out warmer solid-state options or tube amplifiers to tame its natural state. Audeze flagship is a curious headphone for me, as based on the description of its sound signature, it should be ideal for my preferences. It focuses on bass and mid-range, but sports a large soundstage and detail in its upper range. However, the Utopia may not have the same focus, but it is far more of a hi-fi experience to my ears. The LCD4 feels bogged down by comparison, a lot more hazy in presentation and lacking in the micro details that the Utopia sports effortlessly. A being between the two left no doubt in my mind which headphone was the victor, because both are priced about the same and I expected a lot more wow factor at $4,000, not just an extension of the LCD3. Hi-Fi Man's soon-to-be former consumer flagship, now that the Edition 6 has been announced, is a very nice mixture of deep bass extension, soft and pleasing mid-range, and comfortably extended treble. Retailing for about $3,000, the HE1000 is called by some as the headphone they would listen to during a migraine, and I can see why. It is a far more relaxed and pillowy experience compared to the Utopia's trailblazing, take no prisoners nature. I would liken the sound to an evening on the couch listening to your favorite jazz recording with a glass of wine, and near a fireplace for good measure. However, as with the LCD4, preferring the HE1000 to the Utopia is purely a matter of personal preference because it pales in comparison on a technical and detailed reproduction manner. It does put up more of a fight than the Audeze flagship, however, utilizing its larger soundstage and punchy character. When I first saw the HE1000 and its price, I did not think a day would come where it would be the clear underdog to another headphone that wasn't an electrostatic headphone, or the Sennheiser Orpheus. It just sounds veiled and too soft in terms of dynamics compared to the Utopia, better than the LCD4 however. As mentioned before, the Utopia is not very picky with its sources. The best way to sum up what you choose to plug the headphones into is just make sure it doesn't suck. Any halfway decent option should be enough to make the Utopia sound like itself. I spent a large amount of time in the Audio Sanctuary pairing the Utopia with the Cord Dave. This absolutely bonkers, top-of-the-line system provides an immensely detailed, nuanced, and pleasing sound, but you really are throwing price and performance out the window to be hit by ongoing traffic and trampled into the asphalt. Make no mistake, I am not downplaying the magic of the pairing, I'm just pointing out that it is not needed to make the Utopia sound like itself. I also acknowledge the irony of bringing price to performance ratios up in a review of a headphone that costs $4,000 by itself, but I do believe that headphones make the biggest overall impact in a listening experience. The Cord Dave and Focal Utopia will sound like the Focal Utopia, but the Cord Dave and the AC800S won't sound like the Focal Utopia, if that makes sense. To further prove this point to myself before anyone else, I spent an even longer amount of time with the Utopia plugged into an own M1S digital audio player, which is connected via LAN out into the VE Runabout Plus portable headphone amplifier, a combo that is about $350 in total. Not only was the Utopia fully driven, with only 9 to 10 o'clock on the dial being nearly too loud for me, but it also brought out all the characteristics that being amped should. This, just like the faux color layer, is a very easily driven headphone. It is my firm belief that, in this hobby specifically, once you cross the $1,000 threshold, the law of diminishing returns goes into overdrive, with the amount spent above this yielding reduced impact than it did before. I fully realize that these are $4,000, the price of 4 brand new Sennheiser HT800s, or the price of a Sennheiser HT800 and a HiFiMan HE1000 and so on. But while I will not be able to afford the Utopia myself, I can absolutely see what justifies its price. I'm not great with science, and many technical conversations of high fidelity audio can go over my head, but I do know what I hear. What I hear is an experience that is head and shoulders above its competition in the open air headphone market. I will remove myself from the is it worth it question by reminding you that to the overwhelming majority of people out there, spending anything over whatever Beats by Dre costs on headphones is mind-boggling and without merit. That being said, if the Utopia sounded anything lesser than it did, then I would have been quite harsh on them in this review, kind of like how I am with the LCD4. But there are clear differences between it and the competition. Whether or not it's because of the beryllium drivers or whatnot, I cannot say for sure, but it's there and it has moved possibilities for the market as a whole. If you feel that you can build a setup with several headphones, each competing with the Utopia on some level, if not superseding it in the case of bass and soundstage, for the same price while being able to pay for an amplifier and a DAC, I could definitely see that. But I don't see an all-rounder in the high-end open-air market that competes on all fronts quite as much. This is a headphone that is a worthy recipient of its acclaim. If you have the cash handy, it will provide you with an experience that is synonymous with the appeal of high-fidelity audio in headphones, before making the leap to speakers if you haven't already. On the topic of speakers, it still surprises me that Focal is known primarily as a speaker manufacturer. They went from being just that to throwing down the gauntlet as Sennheiser and the others, and the audio world became a lot more interesting. So, that has been my review of the Focal Utopia headphones. I've been wanting to review these for a while. Please hit like if you like this video and subscribe if you'd like to see more content like this in the future. I have quite a few things coming down the pipeline. And once again, thank you to Audio Sanctuary for letting me demo these in their store and gather impressions over the course of several days. And thanks to you for watching, and I will see you next time. Cheers.